If you just clicked on this link, you are probably trying to improve the quality of your beer. So here's a list of the 5 top things that will make your beer better.
We wanted to pick things that are very accessible to new brewers and also some things that older brewers might not yet have. The very first thing, and I think probably the easiest and most important thing to do to make better beer, is get the freshest and best possible ingredients you can.
Fresh ingredients are way, way more important than I think most homebrewers, especially starting homebrewers, realize, especially when it comes to things like your yeast, things like your hops, and even your grains to some extent.
With hops, I think it's a really good idea to be practicing opening up and smelling your hops, giving a good feel for what they're tasting and how pungent they are, if they have all the right flavors that you want. And then also checking things like the lot number and the date that the hops are made, because having those fresh hops is going to make it easier for you to get exactly what you want out of them, especially in things like IPAs.
Making sure that you have a recent-ish crop year and also having some knowledge of how those hops were stored, whether or not they were stored in a hot warehouse or if they were stored in a freezer, makes a big difference.
Also, find an example of older hops. So find some older hops and make sure that you're giving them a good sensory test as well. That way you can start to know if you're getting hops that are not necessarily as fresh or good as you want them to be.
Next, grain freshness is a factor of how it's stored again, but also making sure it's been milled up recently. If you're buying something online, we highly recommend buying unmilled grains so that you can mill them yourself. Otherwise, always go to your local homebrew shop, have them mill them up on site, and that's going to make sure that your grains are as fresh as possible.
And finally, and probably most importantly, is check the expiration date on your yeast, or actually the manufacturing date. As yeast ages, no matter where it is in its journey to its expiration date, it is losing viability constantly, and you want to make sure that you have the cells that are the most active and the most healthy fermenting your beer, because it's going to create a more consistent product.
Speaking of yeast, I think that brings us to our next topic, and that is building up a yeast starter. This is something that's really easy to do for any home brewer, really. All it takes is 4 or 5 ounces of dry malt extract per about a liter or a quart of water. And what you're going to do is build this up a day before you brew. This is going to do a few things. This is going to increase your cell count. It's going to increase the health of your yeast. And really, it's going to end up making for a better beer.
It also makes it so that your yeast get an earlier start on fermenting your beer, which is important if you want to eliminate any sort of risk of contamination. And if you have really active yeast working on fermenting your beer, those yeasts are going to be more competitive. So again, keeping out anything that could possibly go wrong infection-wise with your beer. Another thing with yeast health that I think is really important, super easy to do, although it does take a little bit of capital investment, but is super important for consistency, is actually getting some sort of a setup to oxygenate your wort. There is no large-scale commercial brewery that makes good beer that does not oxygenate the wort every single batch. It's a very, very important thing for consistency of beer, and as soon as you can get into doing that, no matter if you're an extract or an all grain brewer, it will make your beer better.
If you do nothing else with all these suggestions, take care of your yeast.
Speaking of taking care of your yeast, let's go on to temperature control.
Temperature control is more difficult to do as a home brewer, especially as a starting home brewer, but it can have a large impact on the overall quality of your beer. Usually getting beer too hot is the primary concern for a home brewer.
If your yeast gets too hot during fermentation, it'll produce some fruity flavors, so being able to ferment it on the cooler side of its temperature range will help your beer be cleaner. And if you don't have temperature control, just make sure that you're picking a yeast that can do well in whatever conditions you have.
Also, warming a beer up can be essential in the wintertime. This is usually a lot easier than cooling a beer down, but you do have some strains that might be finicky and might want to not finish up fermentation, go to sleep if they do get too cold.
Yeah, so warming them up can help make sure that they finish fermenting your beer. Lastly, something that is really good for tweaking and fine-tuning your beers, and I think it's very common for advanced brewers to get into, but very intimidating for new brewers to get into, is water chemistry.
Water chemistry has a huge, huge impact on the flavor of the beer and the overall, especially mouthfeel of a beer.
So when picking out a style of beer, make sure you're talking to your local homebrew supply store or somebody that you know that is good at water chemistry, and ask them what they should be putting in their mash water, basically, to create the beer profile that you're looking for. If you want to learn more about water chemistry, make sure to check out this video where we talk about it in a little bit more depth. So, to give you a final rundown of everything, we have picking the best and freshest ingredients possible, we have making a yeast starter, we have oxygenating your wort, we have paying attention to temperature control during fermentation, and we have choosing water chemistry that fits the flavor of beer that you are looking for.
If you think that this video is going to help improve your beer, please give it a good old like. If you have not subscribed to our channel already, please subscribe so you can hear all the other fun videos that we put out on more or less a weekly basis. Otherwise, we'll see you next time on Genus Brewing.
Cheers, guys.
Instagrams, too.
Faceborgs.
Ah.
And we'll probably link some stuff below if you need help finding things to make all this work.